Are you spending your time as a retoucher thinking more about the why, or are you focusing more on the how? A good retoucher spends time on both, and you do need both, because a good retoucher believes his own judgment. Now, whether you are told by your client what needs to be done, you're still gonna leave with some creative decisions that are entirely up to you. And a good retoucher knows why those decisions are justified and knows that this is the thing that they are getting paid for, more than a person who just knows the how. If you only know the how, it's relatively easy to copy what you can do, because learning the techniques, learning just the how do you move the slider left and right and make the image more green or more yellow, that's relatively easy, right? But if you know the why you need to do that, or why you not need to do that, now that is a bigger level of skill, better mindset, more unique mindset. And if you can do that creatively on image by image basis, and you can justify your results, you're going to become more valuable as a retoucher. And I think that's something I wanted to discuss today. Not only the how, which I will show you the techniques, but also the why. Why am I doing that? Why you should be doing that. One question that I ask a lot of people who bring me their images or just ask somewhere online for critique is, if they make some kind of a radical change, I ask them, can you justify what you did to somebody who is not a photographer or retoucher, just a regular guy off the street? Can you justify your creative decision to him or her and make them say, yeah, that makes sense? If you can't do that, then you better rethink what you just decided to do with an image. Another thing that I see quite often is that people spend all this time on different tutorials and they learn all these techniques, and then they apply the same techniques on our entry-level type images and some complex and time-consuming techniques. For example, I've been teaching about dodging and burning the skin, and then I see people apply this quite time-consuming technique to images that just doesn't deserve that kind of a treatment. And this is because they lack the why. They know the how, but they never stop to ask the question why. Why am I doing this? Should I be doing this? And that's what makes them inferior retoucher. And I think that if you simply shift your focus in the next months or years of your retouching life towards why would I do this to an image, and if you can justify it, you will become a better retoucher. Another thing that I've discovered is, and this is something that comes natural to anybody who's been in the retouching business or any business for more time, is that when you're starting out, you're so worried about what all these tools do that you spend most of your energy, time, and effort on understanding, okay, what does this slider do? If I move it to the right, it's going to make my image more warm, it's going to make my image more cool. If I move it to the other side, what does this slider do? But once you master how the sliders work, then you can focus on, and if you know all these sliders, in the middle of night somebody wakes you up and you know what they do, then you can focus more on, does this image, or should I say, why does this image would need this type of an adjustment? And I think that makes you a better retoucher, but it does require patience and mastering a certain number of techniques within Photoshop or any other application that you might be using. In this case, we have an image that has several problems that I get asked quite often, and I thought that if I could find one image that can kind of combine all these elements, I can show you on one image the entire process. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire retouching process because that might take more hours, and it wouldn't make you necessarily a better retoucher for it. Instead, I'm going to focus on the why, and then I'm going to show you how I might use a certain number of techniques to fix the problem, but I'm not going to fix it all the way to the end. I'm just going to start fixing it, and then for the rest of it, it's the same principle. You just do more, you spend more time on doing that. So in this case, I have an image that has some freckles. In fact, if I zoom in to about 100%, you will see some freckles. As you can see, she has some freckles, and typically freckles come from more northern type population, right? I don't know, Ireland or Scotland. That's where, whenever time I think about red hair and I think about freckles, that's the kind of part of the world that I'm thinking of. And typically, two things I associate with it: freckles and red hair typically go together, and also pale skin, freckles, and red hair, right? In fact, if I go to Google Images, and if I were to Google for redhead, for example, I would see a lot of examples, and this is a good thing you can do. If you're not familiar and you don't know what to do, well, one of the things you can do is simply look for reference images of something, some kind of a goal where you might take your image, and then use that as a reference point. Now this helps you because you're essentially taking the advantage of somebody who is better retoucher than you, right? And they have already created a good image, and now you use that as a reference point. But if you go with your creative decisions all by yourself and you're not comfortable with your own decisions, you can stray away and you can end up with something that doesn't look so good. But if you have a reference point where you're heading, then you can always adjust it at the end differently, but it will keep you on the right track throughout most of your retouching process, and that's quite useful. So for example, here we have a this would be probably Gillian Anderson, you know, Scully from X-Files, and as you can see, she has reddish type hair, but it's not just red, it's more of a bronze type, and she's quite pale. And most of these images you see redheads with either very red hair, some of them are colored, like this one I believe, and some are just more natural, and usually pale skin, and the freckles kind of go along with that as well. And if you go to one of these sites, and I like to go to a certain number of sites about fashion and beauty if I'm retouching that, to look for reference images. So here I have fashiongonerogue.com, and if you go there you'll find different images for different styles, and you can look for various styles which might fit your working project, so you can use those images as references. Here I looked for redhead as well, and as you can see, I like this kind of hair color, which I would like to use in this image. And also she's quite pale, and if I go to my image, similar type pale, but she likes a bit of contrast. We're gonna have to fix that, right? And here's another image similar to that one from the same website. Here she does have a red hair and she's quite pale, but there is a tint to her tones. I mean, if you take a look at her dress and the background, you can see that they're not quite white. That means that there was some kind of an overlay tint or color applied to the entire image to give her more of that kind of mood, which is different than just a regular portrait shot. I like that as well, so I might use some of those ideas. And that's something I wanted to show you, basically, that you can use a reference point like this, and that if you're not yet comfortable with your own decision making and you don't have a vision of how the image might look, you can always use this to keep your bearings going. Now let's go to our image. Typically I'm currently in the camera raw. This is a raw file, of course, shot with Canon 5D Mark II, and typically I would do some kind of an adjustment to this image inside of camera raw. I might be using Lightroom as well, which has the same processing engine. You might be using a Capture One, for example, or Apple's Aperture, some other third-party type camera, RAW converter. But the thing I like about Camera Raw, it ships along with Photoshop, and I'm working on just one or two images. It's kind of handy to use it, and I like the ability to use smart objects as well, so that's why I'm using it. But as far as controlling the color in the skin and matching everything, that's why I like Capture One. It has by far the best tools for the job. And that brings me to the next problem of this image. So it's not just freckles, it's not that we need to fix the hair and all that, but also if you take a look, there is a discoloration issue. Her hand is more yellowish than her face. The face is more pale, it's more pinkish in color, more magenta, more reddish, while this is more, the hand here is more yellow. So obviously we would need to match one with the other. Two, the way it was shot, the light kind of hits from the right side, which makes this entire right side a little bit more brighter than the left side, which is something we can also fix. Now we can do this in Camera Raw, or try to in this case, or we can do it in Photoshop. Well, let's just do an experiment. Let's go to our graduated filter, and I'm gonna change some settings here which are left over from the last time. And what I'll do is I'll lower my exposure a bit, and then I'll shift drag it here, and I'll lower my exposure just a bit, and what I'll see is that it makes the image match in terms of the lighting a bit more. Right, this was before and this is after. I'm losing some contrast here, but I'm making it slightly more even in terms of lighting. We can always add more contrast a bit later. And the second thing I would like to do is apply another graduated filter on the left side, but this time I would like to use my shadows slider, but unfortunately it will affect the background, which I don't want. So let's try the exposure. That's not going to work either. So I guess we can fix it from here. We're going to have to do it in Photoshop. Unable to create local adjustment, please. Oh yeah, you have to set some of your adjustments before you apply your targeted adjustment tool. Now, what this image pretty much is set for, we don't have a lot of things we can do with this image here. I already tried a few things. It didn't do much good because the image is quite decent in the way it was shot. Nice exposure, nice everything. The only thing that I would like to fix, and that's this type of problems like the discoloration in skin. By the way, when I say discoloration in skin, I think of two things, and this is my personal view. One is the difference in color. As we know, this one is more yellow as opposed to her skin tones in the face. And the second problem is darker patches in the skin, which are not blemishes per se, and they're also not freckles. They're just darker skin tone patches. You see here, and you see this type of here. And those are the kind of darker patches that, if you combine that with the different color in different parts of the skin, makes the whole model look very dynamic, but not in a flattering way. And we as retouchers, we retouch. So we're not photographers, or if we are, we have a role of a retoucher after we shot the image, right? So if you shoot the image and then you retouch it, in other words, you have to fix some of the things you couldn't do in camera. And the whole point of photography and coming out with a finished product in this type of photography, portraiture, is to hide or remove any of the unflattering elements in an image and make the flattering parts stand out. And that's exactly what we want to do here as well. So let's click on our settings. By the way, if you want to apply sharpening to an image, that will depend. In this case, I don't think I want to apply a lot of sharpening, but let's just see. If I go to 100%, and if I go to my details panel, this is default settings, and I think they work just fine. If I remove this to 100 to 0, makes the skin a little bit more soft. So I'll make it 25 here, the way it was, and I think that's significant enough of sharpening to compensate for the softness that we get when we transfer the image from camera. And it's also not too much sharpening, so that we also kind of accentuate all this facial hair and problems in skin, which will just make our job that much harder in Photoshop. It's better to remove those elements like this facial hair here and then apply sharpening for output, or creative sharpening after that. So let's click on this little workflow options link down there. As far as choosing the color space, I'm going to go with Adobe RGB because there's no need to use Pro Photo. There's not a lot of really vibrant colors that I'm going to be losing if I go to this one. And I could even get away with sRGB probably, which is the smaller gamut space, but maybe color here inside of her on her lips, on her lipsticks, and maybe when we introduce a little bit color in the hair, might suffer from lower gamut color space like sRGB. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it in Adobe RGB just to be safe. Bit depth, we can leave it at 8-bit because there aren't anything we're gonna do really with in terms of big nasty adjustments to this image, so we're not gonna destroy that much data to it. There's no need to have this all extra data from here, and also there's not a lot of any type of gradient in an image that we might have to worry about, so 8-bit for this image is perfectly fine. Size, I'm going to leave it at its default native size, 21 megapixel. Resolution, you can leave it at this size, or we can move it to 300 depending on what your output will be. And sharpening, I'll leave it to none. And open Photoshop with Smart Objects. I like to use that because if I click on open object, it will open it up inside of Photoshop as a smart object. Now, smart object is just a container. It basically gives us a gateway back to Camera Raw settings. So if I double click on this layer that now is a smart object, I go back and I can adjust anything I want. And this is a failsafe that I like to use because it gives me a lot of flexibility. If I continue retouching and add a little different layers, what I like about this is that it embeds the original raw file inside a Photoshop PSD file. That way, if I ever give this PSD file to somebody, or if I archive it for later, I don't have to go and look, okay, where was that raw file to go along with the PSD file because I need to change something, right? It's always there in one place, kind of combined. That's why I like it. Okay, so next thing we need to do is I'm going to do some cleanup to this image, because if I zoom to 100%, I can see that I have some issues. For example, these blemishes here, I think I can quickly clean that off. So I'll just I'll Alt or Option click on the new layers icon, and let's name this cleanup. And the reason why I'm doing it like this is because if I'm gonna heal or clone these parts, I'm gonna use a healing brush tool for this one, and I'm gonna make sure that it's set to sample all layers. That way I'm gonna paint on this empty layer and it will sample anything that's beneath it, anything that's visible. And I'm doing this like this, and I'm not just copying the whole background layer as some like to do, because when you copy the entire background layer, what you're doing is you are essentially making the file size double, because you two images inside of one PSD file, right? But if you're doing it like this, especially for something small like this, to remove, if you just create an empty layer, then if I Alt click or Option click on the surrounding area, and let's say I'm gonna remove this, right? Check it out, this is a very small patch of image. That means that the file size has grown just as much as Photoshop needs to draw this little patch of pixels. It's not double in size, it's maybe 1/50th part of the entire image or whatever, right? So it's, if you have an image that is going to have a lot of layers and everything, this is a good way to keep the flexibility and the file size smaller, as opposed to copying the entire background layer. There isn't much we need to do this image, so I'm going to quickly fix a few elements. Nothing really major. Now, in case you're a seasoned retoucher, or if you're doing this for a longer enough time, you've probably done all this kind of cleanup so many times it's not even funny. So there's not much I can teach you here. It's just a manual labor, really. And here we have some facial hairs, but because it's we didn't sharpen it to the point that this is now really sharp individual hairs, we can sample these areas here and we can just paint a little bit over here, and that will break the pattern, the outline of these individual hairs, and that will basically make them less noticeable, almost invisible. If you have a very sharp image that has individual hairs very pronounced, then you're gonna have to do some kind of more precise work to fix that. Same approach, just more precise, I guess. Let's see, here's a part that we can fix. Also, if I'm copying surrounding parts of the skin that has freckles, I'm not too worried about that, because the freckles by its very nature are quite organic, right? If you had some kind of a man-made object or a fabric that has specific patterns, then you would have to worry about which part of the skin or which part of the pattern you're healing from, what are you sampling from. But when you're dealing with freckles like this, they're quite organic, so you can get away with a lot of stuff. Makes our job a little bit easier. And what else do we need to fix here? That's pretty much, she has some hair here, but I don't think this tutorial allows us to really fix all of this, so I'm not going to do it in this tutorial. Like I said, I'm not going to show you everything there is to do about this image because that might take a while. Instead, I'm going to focus on a few techniques and a few why answers behind retouching this image. So let's see. Well, next thing we have here is two problems that I really wanted to talk about. First problem is that we have more yellowish hand than in her face, so we're gonna have to fix that color difference. Second thing is that we have these darker patches here, and we can fix that using dodging and burning. Now, in case you're not familiar, to dodge means to lighten, to burn means to darken a part of an image. That's about it. Very simple concept that's very powerful if used properly. Now, to see parts of an image that needs to we need to apply dodging and burning. Well, first of all, we're not dealing with a lot of color when we're dodging and burning. We don't want color because it's distracting. We are going to use two passes to fix two problems. One problem is darker patches in the skin. We're going to use dodge and burn to fix that, and we're going to use the second pass after that to fix the different discoloration issues. So it's a two-step process, and the reason why I like to do 2 steps to fix that is because it allows me more control, more precise, and in terms of time it's almost the same amount of time. So in order to see better the problems that we're going to have to face, I'm going to use what I refer to, I guess it's a help layer. It's basically a black and white layer. I'm going to click on the black and white adjustment here, and first of all it gets rid of the color, but what I like about it also, it allows me to affect the luminosity values of individual colors. Red and yellow are the ones that we're going to be dealing with in most of the skin tones that you're going to encounter. So you can see I can move them around. Now look how much pronounced all of those problems become. Now we can use this for two reasons. One is that if I were to set this to, actually let me go back, if I were to set this to now luminosity, what I would affect is just the luminosity values, not the color. And if I set this to color blend mode, I'm affecting only the color, therefore it's black and white, but I'm not making any difference with these sliders, right? But if I set it to normal, then I'm affecting both of those, and this allows me to see better the problems in the skin. Okay, good old Ansel Adams. He's gonna serve us in terms of fixing these problems by applying dodging and burning. Now there are several ways in which you can apply dodging and burning as a technique. I mean, there are many ways. In fact, if you're really curious about learning all that you can possibly do with dodging and burning, I've created a whole DVD full of tutorials on that topic. It's called The Art of Dodge and Burn, and you can find it on a website I'm going to link down there. So if you're really curious about what it is that you can do with dodging and burning and you like what you see here, you might as well check that DVD out because it will help you. If you're already familiar with it and you just want to see what I can do with this image or some problems that I'm going to fix, it's fine. It works for me as well. So I'm not going to go into detail about everything you can do with dodging and burning. I have my DVD that I created specifically so that I have enough time to go over all those details. Instead, I'm just going to give you a brief version, and this will might help you to deal with individual problems like this. So first of all, I can create, I can use my dodge and burn tools that ship along with Photoshop here, and I can use them on, I guess, the background copy. But I'm not going to do that. You can also create 2 curves layers, for example. Use one for darkening and you lose the other one for lightening an image, and then you paint on the mask to apply that effect to a certain area. I like to use a technique that is also very popular, and that is the use of what is referred to as a soft light layer or 50% gray layer. Now I'm going to Alt or Option click to set it up on the new layer down there, and I'm going to call this Soft Light 50% Gray Layer. And this dialog box not only allows me now to rename my layer, but it also allows me to choose the different blend modes. And if you go to this pop-up menu list of different blend modes, they're divided into these groups, as you can see. Well, this patch here, they're all affecting your saturation, but they have one really interesting feature. They ignore whatever is 50% gray, and whatever is lighter or darker than that, they just amplify that, which is perfect for what we want to do. Now you can, for dodging and burning, you can use overlay or soft light. I like soft light because it's a more subtle effect and gives me a less shift in the colors after I apply dodging and burning. So I'll choose my soft light, and immediately this option becomes available. Fill with soft light neutral color 50% gray. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to click OK. What it's going to do is going to create a new layer, named it. It's going to fill it with 50% gray. Now, the reason why I fill it, you can use dodging and burning on a blank layer, but the reason why I'm using a soft light combination of completely gray layer is because it allows me to see where I painted. This can be quite useful if I want to show it to somebody like you right now, or if I want to see it later on for myself. What did I do? I'm also going to add a layer mask to this by clicking on the layers mask down there, because I might want to back down some of the effect after I applied it. I'm going to click on this soft light layer, and I'm going to choose my brush. Now, you paint with either black or white to darken, or to lighten, to dodge or to burn. Let me show you. First, let me deactivate my black and white, and I'm gonna move it on top, and I'm gonna go back to my soft light. Now I'm currently at 100% right opacity and flow. Using my brush, it's set to black. If I paint, you can see that I've just darkened part of an image. Let me go back. Let me switch this to now white. Sorry, wrong layer. If I move this across the image, I can see that I'm lightening part of an image, but it's quite harsh effect. What I want to do is much more subtle effect than this. And just to give you a heads up, you can also, if you're using this, you can also Alt or Option click your brush tool while it's lighting. It will temporarily switch to eyedropper, and you can sample a color like I did, and then when you paint, not only darkening, you're also adding that color a little bit. So you can use that for fixing not only the tonal problems but also color problems in the image as well. Quite handy. So what I'll do is I'm going to set some settings for my brush. Now you should know that I'm using a Wacom pen and tablet, which is pressure sensitive instead of a mouse, but you can use your mouse to do just a good job as I am going to be doing. I'm going to be using my Wacom tablet because, quite frankly, I've been using it for so long that I forgot how to do it with my mouse, and I use my mouse for using different adjustments and digging through menus. But when I'm using my dodge and burn tools or any type of painting, I'm using my Wacom tablet because it allows me for pressure sensitivity, and it's quite more organic, more natural. And I guess most people who have been dodging and burning or still doing have at some point invested in the tablet. You might be one of those people watching this, so you know what I'm talking about. Either way, if you plan to do a lot of dodging and burning or any type of painting, it might be a good investment to put some money aside for your tablet. I'm going to be using a tablet, so I'm going to set up some settings for that particular tablet. Now, in case you're not using a tablet, then you're going to play around with probably opacity here and lower it to about 5 to 10%, 15 maybe, depending on what your preference is. If you're using pen and tablet, then you can do two things. You can build up your color, and you can also use pressure sensitivity. Now I'm going to activate this option, and this is an airbrush mode, which combined with the effect here, I'm going to set this to 3%. The reason why I'm setting this to 3% and I'm using this is because this will allow me a very subtle effect, and I will able to build up the effect very subtly, very organically. Again, if you are using a mouse, you might want to use opacity, and you might want to use maybe 10-15% depending on what your preference is. And I'm going to go to my brush panel, and another thing that I want to use for these settings are, I'll go on the transfer and I'll switch opacity and flow. I'll set it to pen pressure here. This will allow me to use my tablet. And as you can see, I have here this option that basically tells me, hey, you're using your mouse at the moment, so this doesn't apply. So you have to be using your tablet. And I'm going to switch to my tablet right now. And as you can see, those, as soon as I switch to my pen, those warning signs go away. So what I can do now is I can paint. I'm going to set D for default swatches and X for exchange. So I'm going to use my white color. It's going to use flow 33%. This is very subtle, it's barely noticeable, but because I'm using pen pressure and it's set to flow, basically the more you move over the same area, the more effective you build up. It's a very organic approach, which I like to use with my pen. So this allows me to really fix this image in some interesting, more organic ways. So I'll use my help layer, right? This will show me all the problems in the skin. And now I think you can see a bit better, right? We have this area here, problem, this area here, problem, this area here, problem, this patch here, this is whiter or more lighter. So we need to fix those. I'll click on my dodge and burn layer, and now I'll fix some of those areas. I'll reduce my brush size using my bracket keys, and I'm going to just paint with white over this area, very subtly, very gently. If you're done, if you know how to use dodge and burn, then this is something that's quite familiar, or if you saw my DVD, then I explained this in detail. But just a few strokes and check it out, right? It really blended it nicely with the background, and even if I deactivate my help layer, I can see that I'm very organically fixing it without affecting the structure of the skin pores beneath. And that's why I like dodging and burning. It's really great for fixing color. Now, each of these pores are essentially like mountains. Basically, they're dark and white patches, right? So if you are, if you know that light, the way it hits those pores, now let me zoom in so you'll know what I mean. See these pores, right? One side of it is lighter, the other is darker, right? So if I use my brush tool here, I can paint with black over the lighter part, and I can paint with white over the other part. And this will essentially allow me to change the way light hit that skin pore, or create an illusion, right? And if I do that on enough of these pores, I can change the way the image looks entirely, and I can fix all the little problems. Now, when you're using a filter, some kind of a skin smoothing technique, the problem with that is that it's not as intelligent. It can use certain parameters and can do a decent job, but it's going to apply pretty much the same effect to every pore. And you can adjust how much of pores you want to affect with different settings and different filters, but ultimately it's going to apply it not because it's a thinking human, but because it set the right parameters for it. When you're using it with brush on one by one pore or different areas, you're making decisions which affect that particular patch of skin individually than the other, which makes it much more organic, and that is what makes the entire results at the end, because of those organic human decisions, much more smoother, looking skin that still looks very natural. So you can use this technique to really smooth out the skin, looking really, really perfect and natural without affecting the problems that you don't want to. You don't want to apply the same type of effect on every pore. So if you go with those small brush, you can affect the pores. Then there's bigger parts of here skin. You basically use the same principle. Only thing you do is you make the brush a little bit bigger. And you can use the same exact technique here. Now I'm going to use just this. I'm going to really quickly go over these patches here, and it's going to affect those areas quite nicely, no problem, right? I'm just gonna paint with white over these darker patches, and because it's so easy to do it, because now when I remove the color I can clearly see where are those darker patches. Now there are some differences here, you see. I wasn't paying attention, so what I did is I made a mistake. There is actually not a patch of dark skin here, but it's a freckle, which I don't want to remove. So what I can do is I can click on this, my created layer mask. I can set my brush to 100%, and I can use black on the mask to reveal that problem that I had, which will fix that issue. And that's how I can go back and forth and protect certain areas that I don't want to affect. So all I want to do is just kind of even out these bigger patches, right? So make my brush size a bit bigger for this area, paint with white over this darker patch, paint with darker over this patch, and I'm using my X key on my keyboard, which will exchange the swatches to black and white down here, which can be quite useful. I'm gonna make it bigger, maybe go over a white area here, and I can see that I'm protecting this mask part. And I'm reducing with my keyboard, I'm reducing my I'm reducing my brush size a little bit, and I'm also exchanging the swatches with the X key, so I can really nicely have a lot of control over what I'm doing. And especially if you've done this quite a few times, you can do this. Like I already told you, once you master a technique, you're not thinking about the technique and how to do it, you're just thinking about what needs to be done to the image. That makes you focus more on the image problems than problems of not remembering what needs to be done. And certain patches here could be mistaken for a for just a bigger essentially a bigger, how do you call it, freckle. So I'm going over these areas real quick here, nothing really major. And here's a darker patch here, so I'm gonna make my brush a bit bigger, and I'm gonna just paint over this. And since I'm so big that I'm not affecting each of the individual freckles, I'm actually affecting everything, which is quite handy when using a dodge and burn technique to deal with those bigger darker patches without affecting the individual freckles. Now, individual freckles is something you can do simply by doing another pass of dodging and burning, and then specifically focusing and targeting each individual freckle to make them a bit more pronounced. Now, I don't like this, so the mask that I created, so I'm going to make that, I'm going to shift click on it to make it disable it. I can always go back if I want to. So I'm just painting our really big brush here because I want to make her face a bit more volumetric without affecting the individual elements. So let's see now how we're coming along. This is before and this is after. This is before and this is after. Well, we're nicely moving along, but there are some areas that I still would like to fix. I'm going to make my brush a bit smaller here, and I'm going to make this area darker, make this a little bit more smoother in terms of the way light hits it, you know. So maybe she doesn't have a perfect nose structure, but we can fix it with simply painting light over it to make it, you know, because you wouldn't know what kind of shape it is because it doesn't have a clearly defined end you know, here and here, because it's just the way a light hits it. You can even give her a nose job if you really wanted to, using dodge and burn, which is quite cool. I'm gonna make it, so let's see. Yeah, you don't want to go too far. That's one of the issues you're gonna have to deal with your own judgment, because I can't tell you how far is too far. Depends on the image. But it's very easy to go overboard and screw up your image. And basically you can change the way somebody completely looks simply by not watching what you have been doing. So let's fix this area here. But before we do, let's make my brush size a little bit bigger. And I have some areas here that I would like to even out. I'm gonna paint with black, but I can see that since this is quite white, my effect with soft light isn't penetrating enough. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make my flow here, I'll set it to about 8%. This will make it a bit more stronger, so I can easily now, with darker brush, as you can see now, it affects it more thoroughly, making it easier to deal with this problem of having tan lines, I guess. This area here, and we can deal with this area. So let's see how we're heading. Actually, before we do, I can see that there is some wider patches here, so I'll make that area here a bit darker again, and I'll reduce my flow to 3% again because I want to make it more subtle. Okay, let's see if we went too far. And before I do, I see a patch over here that I could fix. And maybe this area a little bit more. And we're heading along. So let's see. I'll deactivate my help. And let's see. Well, before and after, we're coming along. We're kind of making her more I don't know if I should say younger, but you know, we're making her more smoother while retaining all the skin texture and everything. That's what I like about dodging and burning. It's really organic type process. It's almost like painting, but of course you need more than one pass typically to really get the job done. So I'll activate my my help layer here, and I'll just fix a part here on the nose because I want to make sure that she doesn't have any issues. There's a darker patch here, so I'll fix that as well. I don't think this is a part of the skin that belongs to a freckle per se, so I'm gonna make that, or maybe if it is, doesn't matter at this point. Let's see if there is a part of the skin. Yeah, we can easily fix that. That's what I like about dodge and burn. You can go back and forth without too much trouble, you know, and as long as since we're so subtle in our effects, we have so low flow value, that we can go back and forth if we screwed something up, and it's not gonna really destroy an image in any way that's that noticeable. So this is before and this is after. Before and after. Now I can see that we have some problems here. Well, that's something we can now, without the help layer, because we're gonna affect the color as well. What I can do is I can alt click or option click on the Mac, and I can sample a color from her hair, for example, which is, if you remember, sorry, Let me click on my swatch. Let me show you what I mean. Let me sample a color from the hair. Now, this is at 59% here. This is the only value you want to really look for. Look, if I go here to this area, look at the number, it's 50. So it's completely 100% or 50% gray, right? It's completely gray. So that means that if I'm painting with this, I'm not making any effect. If I go up, I'm making it more white. If I go down, I'm making it more dark. So this for dodging, this is for burning. But if I move to any of these sides, I'm also affecting the color. Now in case this is orange, because I can move this around. But if I want to make it darker, I'll go a little bit lower, right? And then if I want to add color on top of that, I'll go in this direction. And let's try it now. Let's make this 5% for flow. And let me try now. It's not enough. Let's go to 10%. Ah, look at it now. Now I'm making it not only darker, I'm also affecting the color of this. And I can go over these certain areas. Where there is a complete white area, it might not affect it so much, like we see here. But in others, it might just work fine. Or if that's not enough, we can even reduce how much color and how darker we want it. I'll switch back to my white here because I see that her shoulder is now darker in this area, so I can definitely affect that as well. I'll make my flow 5% and make it a little bit bigger and just paint kind of like a highlight here. So let's see, before and after. As you can see, we're just with light, in a way we're shaping her face. But the problem that we're having is twofold. First of all, we still have to deal with individual freckles and stuff, and two, we are making, by fixing the darker patches, we have made her basically lighter, or her appearance of lighter, made her a little bit flat, less contrasty. So we're gonna have to deal with that. First thing I want to do is, I know that this part is lighter than her arm, right? So we're gonna have to deal with that first. Now I'm gonna create a curves layer. I'm gonna click on my target adjustment. I'm gonna find a place here, and I'm gonna lower the darkness of that part. But I'm also now affecting some of the darker patches which I don't want. So I'll click on my curves layer here, and I'm gonna make it so I'm not affecting these tones here, which would be basically these shadow areas. So let's see how this works. This was before and this is after. So I made her a bit more darker, right? And in doing so, I have made this area a bit more, seem like it's more contrasty. So this was before, this is after. Now I like this, but I don't like it that much because we're affecting the highlights on her hair, and we also made this darker. So what I need to do is I mask this. On Control or Command I, click on the mask, and that will invert it, hide the effect. And then I will basically just paint over this area. And I'm going to do that by X switching to white, and I'm going to set this to maybe 60%. And I'm going to just paint over these areas here. And now what I want to do is I want to zoom to her eyes because I don't want to affect the eyes. So I'll switch back to my black and paint over that area. I don't want to affect those eyes, and I don't want to affect her lips. They'll look fine the way they were. Maybe this highlight here, but that's okay. So what we have now is this. Another thing that we can do is we can also use this curve to add a little bit of color. So I'm going to go to my blue channel, and I know that if I go this way I'm making her blue, this way I'm making her yellow, right? Well, I want to make her a little bit more yellowish, just a tad bit, and you can see that now I'm making her skin tones match this area here. I can feel that we're still lacking in terms of contrast, but that's okay because now we can use a dodge and burn layer once again to really make this area kind of pop. So I'll create another, if you remember, Alt or Option click on the layer. Let's call this soft light 50% gray. Let's set it to soft light, put it down here, and we have a new soft light layer. Now I'm going to use my brush again. This time I'm going to make it to about 5%, using my keyboard shortcut 0 and 5 for entering a 5% here. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and let's paint with dark over these areas here. Actually, I can turn on my help layer so I can see better what I'm doing. Maybe white a bit on her cheeks, and this area here I'm going to make this darker, fix some of this discoloration that we have here so that everything is nice and even. And we can quickly fix some of these issues, right? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to paint a little bit white on her forehead. I want to paint a little bit white on her nose here, on this highlight. I want to go a little bit whiter on her arm here, maybe this area. So I'm basically giving her more volumetric kind of feel, more contrast, because if you add contrast, you're making the whites whiter, darks darker, but you're doing it on something that's already been lit in such a way. When you're dodging and burning the same for the same type of effect, you decide where the light will fall and where, well, it will be more pronounced, where it won't be more pronounced, giving you a bit more control. And let's see how that looks. As you can see, we can easily add a little bit of volumetric feel to it, but that's not enough. I mean, it is a bit too much. So what I'll do is, now with the color version, I'll just reduce some of the problems, and I'm painting with white and black. That's all I'm doing, right? Nothing really major. And so let's select all of these layers that we created so far, and let's Alt or Option click on the group icon, and let's call this how are we going to call this? Retouch. Actually, we're going to have to select them and put them in that group. And now we can turn off all of the adjustments. So this was before and this is after. This is before and this is after. You can see how we're basically shifting the focus of the viewer more towards her face and less towards her arm and less towards the area that was previously lighter. That's this part here. And that's what basically painting with light is all about, right? We're shaping her face. Now, I think this is okay, but what I don't like is that I'm losing overall contrast. In fact, if I go to my histogram, I can see that there's almost no whites here. So I definitely need to fix that. I'm going to create another curves layer, and I'm going to use my slider here on the top, and I'm going to move it to this area. What I don't like is that this made the whole image way too bright for my feeling. So what I want to do is I want to limit this effect only to the highlights. And I'm going to do that by going to Channels, and I'm going to right or command click on the RGB channel. This is what it's known as the luminosity mask. What it does is selects anything that's goes from 50% gray or midtones to highlights. And all I have to do now is invert this selection, Control Shift I or Command Shift I on the Mac, and fill this with black. Make sure my background is black, and I'll click delete. And what this do is it will create basically a mask that looks like this. It's almost like a black and white image. In fact, it is a black and white image. What it did is basically everything that you see is darker here is protected from this new adjustment, and everything that's whiter is affected by it. And you can see what it did. It didn't affect all that much the shadows, right? It didn't make them darker, but it made those highlights really nice. So if that's too much, I can go a little bit less, or I can simply add highlights here, and oops, I can just click on these highlights here and add a little bit of contrasty curve. If I'm not, and you can see what that did. It made her more contrasty without plugging in the details in the shadows. So that looks nice. Now we gotta do is two things. We gotta fix the hair, and we gotta make her more red in hair, and then we'll see how it matches the skin tones that we have now. I'm gonna do that with another curve. Create another curve, go to my targeted adjustment, and before I do, I'm gonna go on the red, and I'm gonna click on the hair, and I'm gonna make her more red in the midtones, and I'm gonna go to blue and again make her more yellow there. This is gonna give me that really fiery look. And all I have to do now is invert the mask, and I'll go to my tool, my brush tool, make sure that this is at 100%, and I'm going to just organically paint over this hair. Now, because this is not a type of image that's that has a really harsh individual hairs, I don't have to worry about where I'm painting. I can easily paint over this hair with too much trouble, and it's going to make her, as you can see, more fiery red relatively easily. It's a subtle effect, but it does its job. So now we gotta do, I guess, is fix how we're gonna do with her her skin tones overall. Well, let's see. Let's try creating a hue adjustment and click on this. With the target adjustments, I'm gonna click on somewhere on her face, and when I change that, it's gonna change her skin tones as well. I'm going for something more yellow, maybe a little bit more saturated, something like this. And let's see how that looks. Looks better, but I don't like how much she did it to the hair, so I'll use my mask that I had for the hair, just control click on it, and go to my hue saturation layer, and I'm gonna fill this area with black so it doesn't affect it as much. And let's see how we're doing with our whole retouch. I'm seeing some problems with this area where I dodge and burn. See this? So luckily it's all on its own layer, so I'll reduce the opacity of that till I get to about some percentage that works fine for me. And let's add another curves layers to this. Make her darker in the midtones, but not the shadows. And let's put this to luminosity mode. By the way, if you create another adjustment like this, and if you set it to luminosity mode or color, if you set it to luminosity mode, it will only affect the brightness values. If you set it to color mode, it will only affect the color. We want luminosity here because I like the color, I just don't like how bright the image was. Now this is moving in a nice direction. The one thing I don't like is that we have too much color on these areas here, and I think that comes from our dodging and burning, or before that even. Yeah, that happened before we even got to dodging and burning area. So one trick that I like to use to kind of reduce that a little bit is now looking at this, and this is something that you might see quite often, is that you go in one direction and you go take a break, you come back and you see, well, I didn't like the way I retouch a part of an image, it went too far in that direction. So you can quickly fix that. I'll just delete this hue saturation, and because I didn't like the way now she was way too saturated to the point that I didn't like it that much. So let's see what we can do with this area. I'll go to my dodge and burn, and I'll use my brush again on the same layer. That was the second one, if you remember, and I'm gonna fix some of these areas here. I'm gonna sample even a color so I can add a little bit more color here. And I'm gonna go with black, and I'm gonna paint over these areas here, because I want her, give her a jawline a little bit more, you know, her shadows a little bit more punch to it. And I can do the same thing with her eyebrows. Like so. And I still don't like this patch here, so I'll make that a little bit more brighter. And you can really do wonders with dodging and burning, but it's very easy to go overboard, so you got to be very organic with it. And if I alt click or option click on this little icon, it will show me my dodge and burn layer, but it's set to 75, so I have to make it all the way to 100%, and you'll see where I painted. That's why I use the soft light layer and not blank layer, because if you set the blank layer to soft light, all of these dodge and burn things will work as well. So I'll reduce this to 75, and I'll alter option click on it again, and I can see that I don't like how bright this is, just way too much distracting from her face. So what I'll do is, oops, that's way too much, so I'll make it and I'll just paint over this area that are too white, maybe even now that I'm looking at this arm as well. And I'm liking where this is going. The only thing I don't like is that the entire image now is starting to look a little bit too orangey, and not just that, but it's also a bit too contrasty, not too contrasty, too saturated. So let's see what we can do if we go to vibrance, and I'll reduce the vibrance a little bit, and I'll increase my saturation. Now this is an effect that sometimes can do wonders, because it gives her more of that, see, still retains some of that color but made her more contrasty, I guess. And I can go to my back to my dodge and burn layer, because I can see that this knuckles here in this area is a bit too much for me, too much white, and I can see that there is a problem here, but we're gonna fix that in a minute. So another thing that I want to do is I want to paint a little bit darker over here, because that was the part that was essentially in the dark, if you remember, because the light hit it that way. Okay, so now we have done this to the image, which is a bit too much, so I'll reduce that even further. Yeah, that looks much better. So now we have another problem. We have an issue with some discoloration still, right? This is a more orangey part. We have some issues in the hair and so on. So for this, I like to use what I've referred to as the color layer. And I'll just alter option click on the new layers icon. Let's call this color layer, and let's set this to color mode, blend mode, and click OK. Now anything that I paint with my brush over any area will only affect the color, and by using my brush and alt or option key I can quickly sample any color from the surrounding area, like so. And I can use this to color parts of an image of the same, you know, to match the color of the surrounding area to the part that's not that color. For example, there are some areas in the hair here that are different in color that I would like to fix. So I'm gonna set it like this. I'm gonna sample a color which is the same as these areas that I like, and I'm gonna set my brush size maybe to about 10%. Very subtle, not too much. And now I'm gonna paint over these areas. And if I see that's not enough, I'll affect it. I guess I didn't pick the right color, so I'm gonna sample again, or maybe see, I'm painting the wrong color. So I'll go back and I'll click on this, make it more yellowish, maybe more brighter. Now watch when I paint. It makes the hair of the same kind of color, right? Which can help, because you can really affect areas very organically, very precise with your brush, and you can make them the same color. I'm just gonna paint over certain areas here, like so. This is gonna make up for the discoloration. It's much easier than if you were to just mask. And I can always sample a surrounding color if I went too far. Yep, I think so. So I'm gonna use this color, and for this arm here, I'm just gonna sample this skin tone, and I'm gonna paint over this area that was, as you saw, too much. I can do that here, and it's gonna make her the same color really, which is good. And here we have areas that are a little bit more contrasty, so they picked up a little bit more color. Well, I can set mine to black, which will desaturate it basically and make it 3% for my brush size, and this will reduce a little bit of color on those more contrasty areas. Like here, making it, you know, less it will appear less discolorated, I guess. So this is before, this is after. Subtle effect, but it does make a difference. Now let's see. So this was the entire before and after. Before and after. I like where we're going, but there's still some areas that I would like to fix. So let me try some. There's a trick that I also might show you. I don't know what he's going to do, but if you take your lasso tool, for example, and if you go over this area, because that's the area that kind of bothers me, it seems to be lacking in some contrast. And if I go to my curves layer, it's going to create a mask just for that area. So anything that I affect is going to affect just that area, right? Well, now I can go to auto, and this will fix, as you can see, just that area. But it did a quite nice job, right? If I click auto without first telling it what it needs to affect, it will do it to the entire image. So what I'm gonna do instead, I'm gonna do another thing. I'm gonna, by the way, if you Alt and Shift or Option and Shift click on the mask, it gives you this kind of preview, quick mask preview, and I'm gonna paint over these areas here because I want this auto command to only affect the skin tones here, like so. So now I protected these darker patches and everything else. So now when I click auto, it's gonna affect just that area, right? But here's an interesting thing. You can go back by edit undo, and you can go to these options for your curves and go to auto options, and here you can choose some options: enhance monochromatic contrast, per channel contrast, find dark and lights, right, enhance brightness and contrast, and you can choose different options here. I'm going to choose this one, and now all I have to do is shift click on the mask to disable it. This will affect now everything, but it's obviously way too much, but that's fine. I'm going to delete this mask because I'm going to create a new mask, and the new mask will be based on the lightest parts of an image. So again, go to my channels and I'll control click on my RGB to create a luminosity mask. Now this mask only affects everything that's from mid-tones, 50% gray or 50% brightness value, to complete white, complete highlights. And now all I gotta do with the selection active, create a mask for my curves and see what it will do. It will create this very subtle effect that will affect anything that was mid-tones to highlights while not destroying the details in the shadows. And I think this gives her more of a contrasty, more punchy looks. And also I'm bringing out some of the individual how do you call freckles, right? Making her really pop. So let's see. This was before the original, and this is after. So we're moving in certain direction. We definitely made a different type of image, but let's say this is a creative attempt. Like, we have complete creative freedom. We just want to create some kind of nice look. Well, let's see. Let's check out our histogram. There's something seems to be missing here, and well, we do lose some detail here, but nothing significant. No problem with the highlights, so we're kind of cool as far as this goes. So now we gotta do is I have two problems with this image now. First of all, I need to bring in some of those freckles more so that they're more visible, especially in this area, and I would need to fix her eyes and lips. So let's do first eyes. I will create another dodge and burn layers. I really like these guys. By the way, I have an action for this, so if I weren't showing you this over and over again so you'll remember it more, I would just press Shift F9, and that's a pre-recorded set of keys that will play back an action doing all of this that you see here for me, so I don't have to worry about that. I'll grab my brush once again and let's go to our eyes. I want to make her eyes a bit more interesting. Here's another trick you can do when using this option. You can set your I'd set it to about 10% for flow, and I'll use my white and I'll make her eyes like so, and then to make them seemingly more sharper without adding sharpness, you can use a very small brush with black and you just paint over this area here. I think I went too far, so I'll reduce my flow to about 5. So you do that, and that's gonna make her appear more sharper without actually adding sharpness. It's pretty cool. Kind of like a, smoke and mirrors type effect. And as you can see, we made her really not good looking because now it looks a bit weird. So what I'll do is I'll reduce that until it hits some point. And now what I like to do is make my brush bigger, about 3%, and what I'll do is I'll just paint a little bit black over this top area of her eye, because I want to make her appear more human without less. See what I mean? Kinda made it a little bit more different. Maybe you can reduce the opacity to this a little bit to about, I don't know, 33%. So it's a very subtle effect, just making the audience more go for the eyes and less for the other parts. By the way, our eyes typically go for the lightest part in an image first, and then they go for the more saturated parts. So with dodge and burn, you can easily paint white and dark, lighten and darken parts of an image, therefore shifting the viewer's attention to individual elements. And if you understand your audience, if you know what you want to do, you can hide with dodging and burning certain elements in an image, and you can make others really pop. And I think that's a really cool thing to do, because you're still keeping all the texture intact and everything. So let's work on her lips a little bit here. I'm still using dodging and burning, so I'll just make her lips on this area here a bit. Actually, it's not enough, so I'll make my flow about 5, and I'll just darken this area. That will give her a more of a fuller look. You know, you can also, like I said, it's all about dodging and burning. It's all about different lights and shadows. So let's see the entire before and after. This was before, this is after. Giving her an interesting look. I don't know if it's that artistic more or more, how should I say, more photographic, but I think we're moving in some direction. Now let's just, for sake of experimenting before I move on, sometimes I just want to stop and try a few things which may or may not work, so bear with me. I'll go to my vibrance again. I'll increase the vibrance and I'll reduce my saturation. Oh, I even like this. Gives her more of a it's a very subtle effect. Not worth it maybe. Let's see if we can, playing around with these two sliders, if we can get to some interesting look. Kind of like this. It's not that big of a deal, but it made her a little bit more darker, a little bit more, I don't know, mysterious, I guess. Alright, and while we're here, let's use the dodge and burn. Let's use another one, and this one we'll use for hair a little bit. So let's call this soft light 50% gray. I'm not using actions here to speed this up. I'm using it real time because I want you to see what I'm doing. So I set this to soft light, fill with the gray, and let's work on her hair. I just want to paint over these highlights. I'm going to use dark and white here really quickly, just to follow the contours of her hair here. And the idea is to make it, I guess, more shinier maybe. Now what I'm seeing is a problem. I'm going to need to sample color from her highlights, because when I paint with white, it just alters the way her hair looks. I don't like the way the effect looks, so I'm gonna just shift this to a bit, so I don't make the highlights of the hair white. I'm making them same color, just brighter. Oops. I have to admit, I'm not very good with hair. It's not one of my specialties, so I tend to avoid it as much as I can. But every retoucher has its weakness, and we should all work on our weaknesses. So I'm doing it in the presence of witnesses. Be gentle. Let's see if that did anything. Oh, kind of moving in the right direction. We could still work on it, but doesn't matter. And let's create another one. Is that how you spell it? Doesn't matter. And let's see what we can do about freckles now. So I'll use my 5 for my flow here with my brush, and I'll make it a little bit smaller. I'll activate my help layer, if you remember, so I can see where they are better. And now I'm just gonna darken them, but I'm doing this very organically, you know, not super, it's not like dots, it's more like I'm painting from one area to the next. Now the problem happens with freckles is that they're not always covering the entire area. They're just, you know, bits and pieces of the skin that just don't have a lot of freckles, and they sometimes can look less symmetrical. It's not so pleasing to the eye, even though it's, you know, real freckles and all that. So what you can do is you can sometimes just darken parts of an area which don't have a lot of freckles, and therefore you can create your own freckles kinda, and that can help you get more symmetrical look in your images. It's kinda, so I'm gonna make this a bit darker, and let's see. Well, here we have an issue. You see, we don't have a lot of those freckles. So what I can do, I can basically just paint areas, and it will create freckles where they're not that visible, and this will give areas that don't have a lot of them and could really benefit, you can make them kind of stand out. So if you were to use some kind of a filter, you could probably not do it like that. So let's see, before and after. What I'm seeing is that my computer is slowing down because I have all these adjustments. So here's another trick you can use. I'm gonna make this go away. I'm gonna hide this layer. I'm gonna click on the next one, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna Control Shift Alt E or Command Shift Option E on the Mac. This will merge everything that's visible. And what I like about this is you can use this as a temporary layer. So what I can do now is I can take these two layers, move them up, and I'm gonna make this two invisible. So this entire retouch group before I did the dodge and burn for the freckles, and the original layer, right? And now look how much smoother everything is, because it doesn't have to calculate all the individual stuff. So if you have a slower computer or just losing memory, it's one way you can speed it up. And now I probably won't get as much lag. Yeah, it's much smoother now. So no, if you can use that, or you can, if you have a lot of layers, what you can do also is you can save your image, and you can basically just send it off. I mean, you can merge everything like this, and you can just save it off as a PSD file, and then you continue working. That way you make a backup, and you're also working with less layers while maintaining all the previous work if you need to. You should just open that previous PSD and copy paste what you need into your working document. So that's another way you can do it. It's much cheaper than scratch disks and a lot of memory, and it's quite effective. Okay, this is, why am I, oh, I'm painting on the wrong layer. If you, I've been talking, so I selected the wrong layer. Let's see what the damage is. It's not that big of a deal. So actually it is. So what I'll do is I'll have to repeat my process. I was selecting the newly created merge layer, and I was actually dodging and burning on it instead of my dodge and burn layer. That's why something was off. So as you can see, I can now really easily paint different freckles and stuff on it, and this will make my now if you do this first and then you try to protect the freckles, you might get a different results, not necessarily worse or better, just different. And I think it depends on the image. Will it work better than doing them afterwards like I'm doing? So that's something you're gonna have to experiment with. Here we don't have a lot of freckles, and we could use some. And that's cool thing about freckles, because they're just, you know, darker patches of the skin. They don't have any real dimension to it. It's not like you have a pimple, so you have to really draw it or just copy, you know, clone it from somewhere. This is just darker patches of the skin, so you can get away with them if you just paint them like this. Depending on how severe you want to go, you know, you can make them really severe or you can make them really subtle, depending on an image. In this case, it's also a demonstrational type image, so I probably am doing more in terms of adding different freckles than I would in some other cases, but it's a demonstrational thing. So, and let's see where else. Here we have an area that could use some freckles to make it more symmetrical. And okay, let's zoom to about, I don't know, 50% and see what we have. It's actually doing a decent job, don't you think? Oops, not with white. I'm not a freckles expert, so I'm not even sure if this is, you know, realistic or not, but from an artistic standpoint it kind of looks cool. Okay, now let's see how this looks. Looking better. And another thing that I want to show you, alright, if I alt click or option click on my freckles, this is what they look like. Not much to look at, right? But they do a very decent job. So let's see what else I can do. I'm going to click on my hue saturation layer, and I'm going to reduce the opacity of this to, I don't know, -20, and let's make this a little bit more yellowish. Nope. See how this looks. I'm liking this. Was a bit more there was too much color originally, but now I'm losing some of the details. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna again make my mask, make my luminosity mask. Now I'm using a keyboard shortcut, but you can also go to these channels and click on control click on your command click on your RGB. This will give you this type of a mask. And let's create. As you can see, I'm reducing in the midtones and the highlights a little bit of that harsh color, so that looks better. And another thing that I want to do is I want to try what it would look like if I activate my black and white, set it to luminosity. So what it did, I can affect now individual color of this, and maybe I can, you know, make certain adjustments that I couldn't do in other ways. That's gonna make her appear more interesting. Okay. Maybe a hair a little bit, and so on. I don't like what it did to this lips, so I'm gonna make it even more darker, like so. And I didn't do much, so I think I can even delete it. And I want to try what it would look like, this image, if I change the color of the lips. Now the reason why I want to do that is because in all the other images that I saw on redheads, I didn't see a lot of this type of pink lipstick, and it doesn't seem to be matching with anything. I'm not a makeup artist, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, real justification, but I'm kind of wondering, can I change the color of this to more reddish tone and see how it will look? Maybe not even reddish, just different types of tone or color. Let's see how that looks. I think it makes her less of a girly type look, and with that kind of a really harsh lipstick, it just wasn't really flattering. I think it was taking too much away from the rest of the image. But if I could, make it go away like this, it's still a similar color, but I think it matches the rest of it a little bit better. And the last thing I want to do, I want to create another hue saturation layer, and this time I want to take away this color. So I'm just going to click on that with target adjustment tool on that blue color. I'm going to make it go away, and I'm going to invert the mask, Control or Command I, and I'm going to paint with my brush here over these areas. Looks like we have some color that is probably cyans, maybe, no, blues. Well, there's some magenta there as well, so I'm going to move this slider to the right. And where else do we have the same problem? In her teeth, right, which I guess could reflect this light, but I'm going to make it go away anyway. Subtle, but okay. So I think we're moving in the right direction. The only thing that kind of bothers me a little bit is this arm is killing me here. I think it's taking too much away from the face. It's too bright. Remember, we go for the brightest parts first. So what I'll do is I'll try with my curves layer. Make it like this, invert the mask, Control I, and now let's paint over that area with about, I don't know, 50% with white. Now the reason I'm not using a soft light layer here is because there's too much white, and the soft light works very well with midtones, not so much with very white kind of or black tones. Curves does a little bit better job, so if you do happen to have something like this, you can use this. So this is essentially dodging and burning. I mean, it's the same principle. The only, I guess, difference is this makes it look older, this line. And let's see. Yeah, I think that makes this area a little bit better. And the next thing I want to do is I want to take this area at the top. It doesn't seem to match the contrast of the lower parts, and I want to change two things. I want to make two curves on top of this. Actually, maybe I can use the same curve for darkening. Make this parts darker, and then make this parts lighter. So I'm going to create another curve, and this time I'm going to make this parts lighter, maybe a bit of an S curve, and I'm going to invert the mask, grab my brush, go out 50%, and let's paint over these areas. Or actually maybe make it 100%, because her hair could definitely use some work. So I'm gonna go to my what was it? This one for darkening, and I'm gonna paint over these areas to make those highlights a bit, you know, more natural. And I'm gonna darken parts of this thing here, maybe a little underneath her jaw, make her okay. I think we're done. So let's see. So this is another retouch, right? We don't need this merge version. We can take that away. All we need is original plus this one. And now we're gonna take all this newly created layers and put it down in the group, so we have everything in one group. So this was the original, this is the retouched version. Now that I look at it before and after, this is a little bit too much red, so we're gonna fix that with another hue saturation. I'm gonna click on the reds and make it a little bit more yellowish and less saturated. And again, invert the mask. Oops, wrong button. Invert the mask. Use my brush tool and just go over this area to make it match. Yeah, that's a bit better. And now we have before and after. Before and after. So I could still tweak details and work on some areas here and there and fix her skin and all that, but I wanted to show you basically how you can take an image and you know, just use a certain techniques here that you saw from dodging and burning to the rest of it, and I try to explain as much as I could along the way why I'm doing the things I'm doing. So actually I think it might be a good idea to just go over all the individual elements one more time. Okay, so I'll just right click on the on this icon and I'll choose show hide all other layers, and I'll activate my original, and let's go one by one to see what we've done. So cleanup, I was just cleaning up certain details like small blemishes in the skin and things like that. So then we had a dodge and burn layer, which was the one that we used to take care of the major discoloration or darker patches in an image. Okay, then we had a curves layer which made her a little bit more darker to match the tonality of her hand. Then we had dodge and burn to kind of give her more a three-dimensional look. Then we had a curves layer. This was an S-shaped curve to add more contrast, but we have a luminosity mask attached to it so that we're protecting the shadows. We're only affecting the highlights, as you can see. Then we had another layer, curves layer, which we used a little bit red in the mid-tones and a little bit yellow in the blue channel, and this gave a little bit more life to her hair, making her more reddish. Then we have another curves layer, and this one was basically darker and everything, I believe. Yeah, a little bit in the mid-tones, was too bright. And then we had a little bit of this was slightly adjusted vibrance and saturation sliders to kind of, at the time I thought it was a bit more too much contrast. And that's one of the things that I would recommend when you're working like this in real time, or you're just doing everything from one attempt. The problem happens is that you simply don't have enough time for your eyes to be objective. I mean, let me rephrase that. The problem is your eyes get really comfortable watching an image real soon, and if you walk away, come back again, you might take a look at it with a more objective point of view. So when I did something like this, I made an adjustment that didn't make much difference now that I'm looking at it, but at the time, maybe you, as just as me, have seen a little bit more saturation than it was necessary. Then we did a color layer. Remember, that's just adding color by painting. to kind of fix the problems in the hair. Then I add another curves adjustment, but if you remember, that was a trick when I just selected her face, applied the auto command, then I revealed that mask to affect everything, and then I replaced that mask with another luminosity mask so I don't plug up the shadows, just the highlights. I really like that trick. And here we have another not too significant vibrance adjustment. Those eyes. Anyway, we have another one for lips and for eyes. Soft light 50% gray dodge and burn layer. Then I did another one. This one was for her hair to kind of give her a little bit more shiny effect. I could have done a better job. Then we have one for freckles, just painting a little bit of freckles here and there. And then we had one that's a hue saturation layer, right, which just reduced the saturation of some of the highlights. I thought it was a bit more than it necessary. Then we have one that affected her lips, which I thought were too much. The eyes were going in that direction. Then I made another hue saturation one to fix the blue cast in her eye, whites of her eyes. And then we made another adjustment to kind of darken parts of an image. So if we darken the surrounding areas around her face, in this case what's surrounding her face, her hair, if we darken that, look how your eyes immediately shift to the brightest parts, and that's her face. So we didn't touch the face to make the audience move in that direction. And then we have another one which is basically to lighten just the highlights a tiny bit. And the last one was basically to just desaturate some of the hair here, and I think I can actually reduce this to about 50%. And that's my retouch for this image: before, after, before, after. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned some new things and tricks, and you kind of saw me progressing. And I might have been a little bit quick with certain techniques, because if you're a total beginner, then this might have been a bit too much. I hope that you can watch different tutorials from different authors, or even my video about dodging and burning, and that will help you understand certain elements of what I was saying better in more detail. But for intermediate users, it might be too boring if I did everything in detail. Plus, this video might be not 2 hours, but 12 hours, and that wouldn't be interesting to everybody, especially for this format. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something.